and they were literally knuckle deep in human gore, removing pieces of shards of metal from this poor man's body. They saved his life. And then after that, as they were washing themselves down, they turned to me and they said, "Should we be wearing a suit?" And of course, that was a response to the criticism of Zelensky leveled at him in the White House for not wearing a business suit, as if that was somehow disrespecting America. And to Ukrainians, that comment, those questions just exposed the massive gulf in understanding between what's really happening here and between what people say is happening in America, what people think is happening in America, but just a huge chasm of understanding. And so the Ukrainians are angry, but they respond to it with humour, and fundamentally, they also have to carry on going. So there is anger, there is humour, and there is resilience. They have no choice but to carry on going. Those surgeons can't down tools. Those soldiers on the front line can't stop fighting. They carry on.
Now, as I mentioned, there's a huge amount of diplomacy happening between lots of different people trying to sort of calm things down, trying to find a path to peace. Meanwhile, Russia is continuing its bombardment of Ukraine. And last night, there was the first major attack since America suspended military aid and intelligence sharing. At least 18 people, including 4 children, were injured as Russian missiles and drones targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and that's, I think, a big hit on the energy infrastructure. Now, it follows President Macron's call earlier this week for a 4-week truce in the air, at sea, and on energy infrastructure. But it looks like President Putin very much does not care about that. Macron and Keir Starmer are due to discuss this over a video call today. Now, yesterday, EU leaders backed a new defence spending plan that could free up €650 billion to rearm the continent. Well, joining us now is Jerome Starkey. Jerome's the defence editor for The Sun. He joins us now from Kyiv, and he has been in Ukraine for the last few weeks. Jerome, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
So look, just recap us on what happened last night.
Well, last night, another massive wave of drone and missile bombardments, principally drones, I think some 260 according to Ukraine's Air Force. And this is night after night after night. The only ask from US negotiators when they met the Russians in Riyadh was for a hiatus on these strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. And Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov brushed that off by lying, saying that Russia didn't hit civilian infrastructure, didn't hit Ukraine's energy infrastructure. And yet these strikes continue. And of course, it comes 24 hours after that earlier strike in Kryvyi Rih. Ballistic missiles hit a hotel, killing at least 3 people, dozens injured. Ukraine is facing a sort of 2 kinds of assault every single day. On the front lines, in the trenches, its soldiers are getting hammered by artillery, by mortars, by the CAB glide bombs, guided glide bombs. And then the rest of the country, areas that might feel safe for most of 23 hours a day, face the risk, the threat, the constant threat of airstrikes, missile strikes and drone strikes right across the country.
And Jerome, with the news of the pause in help from America to Ukraine and the halting of intelligence sharing, has that started to impact on the ground, or will that take some time?
I think it's too early to say categorically. On the very front lines, fundamentally, the weapons that the soldiers are using there, the artillery shells, the bullets, they have supplies which are, with the stockpiles, are likely to last months, several months, should see them well into the summer. But where we may feel the impact more immediately is with both the choke on intelligence and some of the most high-end sophisticated weapons that Ukraine has, most notably things like Patriot missiles. And those are what Ukraine needs to defend places like this, cities like Kyiv, from those airstrikes. You don't need a Patriot missile to shoot down a Shahed drone, because Shahed drones are sort of relatively slow flying, low flying and predictable. They can be shot down with anti-aircraft cannons, things that people would recognize from World War II. But the faster missiles, the more sophisticated, deadly cruise and ballistic missiles that Russia fires at cities in Ukraine require more sophisticated countermeasures, air defenses like the Patriot. And of course, the other thing that will make an immediate difference is the choke on intelligence sharing, because the missile early warning system that civilians right across Ukraine rely on. I mean, while I'm here, I have an app on my phone. It will beep every time there is an air alert in the areas that I am in. That is fed by all sorts of systems, but including American intelligence. So Ukraine's missile early warning system is going to be depleted. It's going to be less accurate if America chokes off that sort of information.
And in terms of this sort of stopping or pausing intelligence sharing, will that affect the intelligence that British and other European allies can share with Ukraine?
Well, it's within America's right to stop allies sharing American intelligence. And that's the way every intelligence relationship is governed by very strict rules. So were Britain to receive intelligence from America, and America has said you can't pass that on to Ukraine, then that would be a sort of hard and fast ban. But America cannot stop, or hasn't so far attempted to stop, allies from sharing their sovereign intelligence with Ukraine. And the message from officials I've spoken to in the UK is certainly that they fully intend to continue sharing British intelligence that is useful to the Ukrainians. So, for example, Royal Air Force spy planes, the Rivet Joint spy planes, routinely patrol the international airspace of the Black Sea. And these are aircraft that fitted with all sorts of sophisticated sensors that can soak up signals intelligence. They are crewed by spies from GCHQ, the government listening post. So it's a joint GCHQ RAF asset. Those flights will continue. That is sovereign UK intelligence. Now, it is habitually shared with America. Whatever the United Kingdom, the RAF collect from Rivet Joints, they routinely share it with America, and America does vice versa because both countries operate the same aircraft. There may now be a sort of complicated process of division, disambiguation, to allow, for example, the UK to share its share of that collection with the Ukrainians. And that's really important because it helps understand Russian intentions, Russian troop movements, and Russian capabilities. For example, the position of Russian air defense systems, which Ukraine has systematically and successfully targeted to allow it to hit high-value targets behind them.
I mean, all of this does feel like it's sort of like Ukraine having to fight with one hand behind their back. It does make it more difficult. And as you mentioned, it's going to take some time to see the full extent of this pause on aid and arms to Ukraine. If America does continue that pause, how long do you think Ukraine can fight for until it sort of runs out of American equipment and American aid? And will there be enough to support them coming from European allies?
It's a really good question, and I don't want to mislead your listeners. I cannot answer that question precisely, but experts that I have spoken to and read are sort of the range of estimates is between 2 and 6 months before this pause on military aid starts to bite. And what the Ukrainians say, though, is very interesting. They make 2 points that I've heard time and time again over the last week. The first is that this has happened before. So in the autumn of 2023 through until April 2024, Republicans in Congress who were in opposition at the time but were doing Donald Trump's bidding effectively blocked a $61 billion US military aid package that Joe Biden's White House was trying to get through Congress, and that was blocked. And as a consequence of that, American munitions ran out. So Ukraine has felt this before. There was a shell shortage. I spent time with artillery gunners on the Donetsk front line this week, and they were recalling that. They said, during the shell shortage, their rate of fire dropped to perhaps 20 shells a day. It's now back up to around 3 times that on average. So they've been here before. The other point they make is that they don't have any choice. This isn't a war of choice for Ukraine. It is a war of choice for Russia. Ukraine has been invaded and it's fighting to defend itself. It's fighting for its survival. So long as they want to survive, they will have to continue resisting the Russian invasion, and they'll have to use whatever tools they have at their disposal to do that. Clearly, it's going to be much, much more difficult for them if they don't have American support.
And Jerome, clearly you've been speaking with Ukrainian soldiers. You're in touch with lots of kind of senior people from the Ukrainian military. You're in Ukraine. You mix with ordinary Ukrainian citizens. What is the mood like of those people, particularly for people who have to go and fight? You know, the last 3 weeks has been, you know, traumatic for even all of us who are not involved directly in this war. What's it like for people on the front line, you know, hearing this kind of war of attrition against Ukraine?
Well, I think I've encountered two reactions which come simultaneously. There is anger. Ukraine is reeling, as the rest of the world is, as you rightly say, from Donald Trump's extraordinary dizzying tilt towards Moscow, that row in the Oval Office where Ukrainians felt, you know, I think overwhelmingly feel that President Zelensky was horrendously disrespected and bullied by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, and then the decisions to stop military aid and stop sharing intelligence. I spent time in a field hospital last week. It was a really eye-opening and gruesome experience. It was really difficult, I have to say, where we saw a very seriously wounded soldier brought in from the Pokrovsk front line. He'd suffered horrific facial burns and shrapnel wounds to his arms, his legs, and his back. And I saw these surgeons saving his life. It was extraordinary, and they were literally knuckle deep in human gore, removing pieces of shards of metal from this poor man's body. They saved his life. And then after that, as they were washing themselves down, they turned to me and they said, "Should we be wearing a suit?" And of course, that was a response to the criticism of Zelensky leveled at him in the White House for not wearing a business suit, as if that was somehow disrespecting America. And to Ukrainians, that comment, those questions just exposed the massive gulf in understanding between what's really happening here and between what people say is happening in America, what people think is happening in America, but just a huge chasm of understanding. And so the Ukrainians are angry, but they respond to it with humour, and fundamentally, they also have to carry on going. So there is anger, there is humour, and there is resilience. They have no choice but to carry on going. Those surgeons can't down tools. Those soldiers on the front line can't stop fighting. They carry on.
Yeah, they certainly can't go for a skiing weekend in the middle of all of this. Jerome, really good to catch up with you. Thank you so much for your time. That's Jerome Starkey, who's defence editor for The Sun.